Bienvenidos a Sapiens Wisdom. Hoy nos acompaña el doctor Adam Smith, un reconocido científico internacional que también dirige la parte científica, el director científico del Nobel Prize Outreach, y su biografía incluye pasantías y trabajos en biología molecular, neurociencia y fisiología en Oxford, en Harvard y en la Universidad de Heidelberg. También ha realizado investigaciones en neurociencia del desarrollo en la Universidad de Oxford, antes de unirse al Nature Publishing Group, donde lanzó el Nature Reviews Drug Discovery como su fundador, y luego como en su fase de publicación también dirigió la parte de portafolio de biofarma de la revista Nature y actualmente pues trabaja dirigiendo el Nobel Prize Inspiration Initiative, esa iniciativa educacional que lleva a los ganadores del Premio Nobel a conocer e inspirar a la siguiente generación de científicos alrededor del mundo. Él también trabaja y realiza eh, un- una serie de podcasts a través del Nobel Prize Conversations, donde tiene conversaciones inspiradoras con los ganadores del Premio Nobel. Así que ahora vamos a conversar y pasar a la parte de inglés. So, thank you very much, Adam, for accepting our invitation and for being here today. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. Thank you. And thank you so much, Hector, for the kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great, great. So today we will ask you several questions about your life, and to do that, we also are accompanied by Marvin Vallecillo, Nadia Padilla, and Carol Rosales, who are students and researchers in Latin America. Specifically, they are located in Honduras, and they will be also making some questions. And to start, I would like to ask you about the origins of your interest in science. When did that begin?
I suppose, like so many people I ask that question of, I'm not really sure how it began because it's sort of always been there. Um, I, I was just curious and motivated by science subjects at school and in the world around me. I was quite lucky in that I got to see quite a lot of different places as I was growing up. And in those places, there were things to investigate. And I was just always, pulling things apart and trying to see how they worked. And nature appealed to me very much indeed. I was brought up in and around nature. And that was a big feature of my life, and animals I was fascinated by. So it wasn't so much that I made any decision to be a scientist. And in fact, I think that I'm not very good at making decisions about what to do, but things come along and somehow it was just the path that was revealing itself to me.
Great, great. Did you ever imagine when you were a kid that someday you would be working at the Nobel Prize?
No, I don't suppose I even knew what the Nobel Prize was. No, you see, I don't think I really imagined anything. I just was interested in the things that were in front of me. And that sounds a bit boring, really, in a way, but I didn't have any grand vision of, even when I became a scientist and I was doing research, it wasn't that I had a vision of where I was going with my research. Maybe I should have had a vision. I had only questions that I found were interesting and thought about ways to explore them.
Great.
And I think the same was true when I went into publishing. It wasn't that I imagined being a publisher. I just was interested in what was in front of me. And that continues to be the case, more so now. Now I tend to be focused very much on the person in front of me or the topic in front of me.
Well, it's an interesting philosophy actually, and way of conducting and living, because by being focused on the now and the projects that you're interested, you have been able to be in, well, have an amazing career. You've been in at Oxford, at Harvard, and the Nobel Prize. So I think it has worked pretty well.
It's well, at one level, yes, but I think it failed me at another level. That as a scientist, I think it would have been good to have a bigger question to ask. Something that was so remote that it seemed almost impossible, but at the same time drove me forward. And you find that I find that so often when I'm talking to great scientists, that sure, they have things that are interesting them on the day-to-day level, but they sort of have a big question somewhere that they won't drop. It's, like a dog with a bone, they just hang on to it, even though it seems insurmountably difficult. And it might take decades to get to the real answer. Um, that they have that power of imagination, that they can imagine that somebody could solve this big question. And I'm not sure I have that. And so I was lacking in that. And so, as I say, it's not, it's it, yeah, it's the way that I seem to do things for whatever reason.
Great, great. So now I will let Carol Rosales make a question. So I will put her in the spotlight. Uh, there you go. Go ahead, Carol.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the Dr. Adam Smith for being here. It's a pleasure to know you. Well, my question is,
It's a great pleasure to meet you.
what was your maybe the thing that led you to put aside the part of your research career, and you became more like a mentor and a teacher to all the new scientists around the world?
That's how it's ended up, and I think that's a nice way of phrasing it. I'm not sure whether I'm the mentor. I think I'm perhaps the person who makes the connection between the young researchers and these amazing figures in science. I think that I found that there seems to be a role for that person who can make the conversation go more smoothly and help young people discover more about science by talking to great scientists, and somewhere in the middle I can fit in. But the transition from research was really, I suppose, that I always liked observing what other people were doing, and I was always very interested in all sorts of different projects. So my own lab was a little bit too various. I had projects in many different fields, although my main question was neural development. I was getting involved in collaborations with all sorts of different people because their projects were so interesting. And that was a bit of a phenotype of somebody who was maybe an editor, liked to write about things, liked to comment on science. And I saw that in myself, and that turned out to be a good basis to go into publishing with. And then I suppose even more broadly, it led to my approach at working with the Nobel sphere, where it's partly about talking to individuals about their science and trying to translate that, but then it's also about talking about big global topics and how we might address them. What's the impact of technology going to be on the way we live in the future? What's the future of health? How do we imagine that we're going to make the best use of resources in the future? That sort of question. And again, you can come at it as a specialist and have something really important to say, but I don't have that. But what I do like to do is to see what other people are saying. But I have to say sorry, I don't want to go on too much, but I have to say on this question of being an educator and a mentor, I mean, I think actually I'm in an incredibly fortunate position because I meet all these brilliant people around the world, all these brilliant young people. And every country I go to, every university I go to, everywhere, you meet the same quality of brilliant, brilliant people. And it's an incredible privilege to see all these people. Most of us don't get to meet that huge section of humanity who are thinking so amazingly, sort of excitingly about the future and the possibilities of especially what science can do in my case. And so, I'm also in a constant phase of being educated by all these wonderful people I meet, which is very nice.
And through those experiences, have you ever considered taking those teachings from various Nobel laureates and into future research of
Of my own, or
your own? Yeah.
Oh yes, I consider it all the time. Every department I visit, every lab I visit, I think, oh, if only I could work here. It's such fun. And I every so often I talk about this when I'm traveling with some Nobel laureate, and they'll say, well, okay, you can come and work for me as a postdoc. Do you want a postdoc? So I've got a few postdoc offers there, and that would be fun. I don't think anybody would trust me with money to do my own research anymore. I used to talk about, I have a great friend, Juan Carlos Lopez, who was the editor of Nature Medicine and has done all sorts of interesting things. And when we were at Nature, we used to talk about restarting, going back and having our own labs. And I think, it's a dream. And certainly, boy, would I do it differently now, having talked to all these people.
Yeah.
So if you know of somebody with some money to give away and a lab for me to set up in, I'm there. Honduras would work fine. You just tell me.
Great. Yeah, now I will give the opportunity to Marvin Vallecillo to ask a question.
Nice to meet you, Dr. Adam Smith.
Nice to meet you.
Marvin Minjivar. I am a medical student. I read your biography and the very interesting and admirable. Have you handled this pressure or represent some present institution?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch.
Sí, but you can make it in Spanish and I can translate if you wish, Marvin.
¿Cómo maneja la presión de representar una institución tan prestigiosa?
How do you handle the pressure of representing such a prestigious institution as the Nobel Prize?
What an interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before, and it's fascinating. I suppose one answer is that actually working for an institution with a very strong brand name in a way relieves a lot of pressure. And that's not a terribly good thing, but it is something to recognize that because people are, I suppose, they like these brands, they like the Nobel brand. And I also think of Nature when I used to work there, the Nature brand. If you go in to talk to people coming from those places, they want to talk to you. And that is, I was quite struck by that when I moved from being a scientist to working first for Nature, that when I was a scientist, I was always feeling a great pressure when I went in to talk to people that I had to represent myself as a good scientist. People were watching to see whether I was good at this. When you come from a big brand, people treat you a little differently, and they start, they're quite keen to talk. And that was the first big realization that, hey, this alters the scale, and it's not really fair because you haven't changed yourself, and it's not, and so the fact that some important person is more happy to talk to you now than they were before is only because of the brand sitting on your shoulder. It's not because you've changed. So I was always struck by the injustice of this, but but that makes it easy to have the conversations. In terms of representing the brand as not making a mistake with the brand, if you like. Yes, of course you have to be careful. I mean, you have to watch what you're talking about, and you have to think of the history of what went before you. Working for there's 100 people who work for, if you like, maybe the Nobel sphere, and they all go out there and do wonderful things, and each one is a tiny part of a very big enterprise. But yes, I think everyone's aware that you mustn't you don't want to diminish things in any way. But it's an interesting framing, because it hadn't occurred to me. I think that perhaps it's because as you go through, you just have so many conversations. It's so important to learn to not to be worried about conversations, and not to feel that you're inhibited in a way. That's something you get with time and practice.
Great.
I don't know if that answers the question, but as I say, it's made me think.
Great. Thank you, Marvin, for your question, and thank you, Dr. Adam, for your answer. Nadia, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, let me.
Yes.
Hi, Nadia.
Nadia Padilla.
Yes. Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Adam Smith. We are very happy and excited to have you with us. Thank you so much. My question. No, you don't hear me.
I hear you. No, please. I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. Please carry on. It's nice to meet you.
Sorry. My question is the following. What impact do you think the Nobel Prizes have had on scientists? And if you could create like a new category, like an additional category on Nobel Prizes, what will be and why? That is my question.
Well, the second question is easier than the first question. So let's start with the second question. I wouldn't create any new category for Nobel Prizes. Now, for two reasons. The first is that there won't ever be another category for Nobel Prizes. They're very strict about that. The Nobel Prize adheres to the will of Alfred Nobel, precisely, that he set down in his will that there should be these 5 prizes in 5 separate subjects. And those are the 5 Nobel Prizes. Now, it's true that there's a prize in economic sciences, which is awarded at the same time and announced at the same time. It isn't technically a Nobel Prize because they called it a different name. They called it the Prize in Economic Sciences in honor of Alfred Nobel, but effectively people think of it as the Nobel Prize. But that was the only exception that will ever happen. It was created in 1969, and they're absolutely firm that it won't happen again. So that's the easy answer. The second answer to that question is that I think it's quite important that there aren't lots of categories, because one of the points of the Nobel Prize is that, or the disciplines it covers, is that they're extremely broadly interpreted, that they don't segment topics into delineated silos. Physics is very broad in the interpretation of the Nobel Prize, or peace can be very broad. For instance, the Peace Prize was given to the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, because climate change is so intricately linked with peace. So I think it's actually it sends quite a signal that disciplines have very ragged edges, and that you have to think about cross-disciplinary collaborations to make things work. And for instance, last year's chemistry and physics prizes went to a large extent to, well, in physics completely to, and in chemistry partially to AI, and those perhaps wouldn't normally be defined as chemistry and physics, or AI wouldn't. So I think interpreting the subjects broadly is important. The first question is very difficult. Wow, what impact has the Nobel Prize had on scientists? You can answer that at so many different levels. I'm sorry, I don't want to go on too long, but first of all, the scientists who get the Nobel Prize, boy, does it have an impact on them. It is a very well-regarded prize, and that just is a fact. And so when people get it, they get an awful lot more invitations than they used to get, and a lot of people listen to them, and that can go too far. There was a very funny comment made by one of the people who got the economics prize in the third year. He's called Friedrich von Hayek, and he said, this prize is too powerful to give to an economist, because, if you give, economists will talk about anything anyway, and if you give them something as important as a Nobel Prize, then everybody's going to listen to them, and that's a disaster. So, they should actually sign an undertaking that they won't speak about anything beyond their competence. So it puts scientists on a platform and therefore has a big influence on the scientists themselves, the individuals. It also has an influence on how the world perceives a topic, because it's one of the few times in the year that the world sort of pays attention to something, because in science they announce the Nobel Prize in that subject and people look at it. It's recognition for a field, and therefore for the scientists in that field. And that point was extremely nicely pointed out by one of last year's medicine laureates, Victor Ambros. He keeps making this point that although he's very pleased, of course, that he's become a Nobel laureate, and rather, it's a nice recognition for him, but he points out that it's actually a recognition for the field. It's a recognition for his circle of collaborators, his lab, but the field in general. And that, isn't it lovely for everybody? And that people are genuinely happy in the field that microRNAs got the prize. So it has that influence. I think that, I suppose, the focus on the subtopics acts as an encouragement for people moving into the field as well, and highlights a field. But of course, there are also the negative effects of the prize on science, that, if you have something that is so singling out and important, one has to consider those who either just miss out on getting it and perhaps are sad that they didn't get a Nobel Prize, and that can be destructive. And also the fact that it could be interpreted by the world that some field matters more because they got a Nobel Prize. But of course, that's not the case. It's just that this field was the one that happened to get selected. But there's no winner with the Nobel Prize. It's just that it recognizes good science. It's not that it's better science. It's just good science. But it's a very deep question. I mean, I'd love to know what you think the influence of the Nobel Prize on science has been. But I don't know if it would be fascinating to hear everybody's answers to that question.
It's a very interesting. What do you think, Nadia?
You don't have to answer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Ask you, about my opinion about
Yes.
this. Okay, it's yes, we can look at it in two ways. First, the positive impact that it could have, and the negative one, because it is positive when it motivate people, more scientists to give its best effort for achieving trying to for her, no? But in the negative way, like you say, that it could be that people that they think that because they don't how can I say they don't achieve that work, so they could feel bad. So that's something that I think that we can when we say the word impact, we can see in two different perspectives, and that.
I think you're right, and I think that the thing is that maybe, I mean, that individual effect you cannot get away from, and certainly I've met people who have been so close to getting a prize, usually people who have just been outside the awarded group for a particular prize, that they have been unhappy about it, and it has had an effect. And you can't get away from that with a prize given for individuals doing, doing work in some specific subject. But maybe the question you asked, which is has been the influence of the Nobel Prize on scientists, could be broadened, because in a way, scientists don't need the Nobel Prize to do great science. It's there. It has has a small effect on some people, and it's lovely that we can then go around the world and introduce laureates to young people, for instance. But perhaps the effect is broader than the effect on scientists. It's the effect on the way the world thinks about these subjects. And I think that is where its real impact is, that it highlights great work in particular fields to a much wider public than just the scientists. The scientists knew what they were doing in microRNA work. They were all happy with it, and whether the Nobel Prize had come or not, it wouldn't change anything. They just get on and do their research and make their discoveries. But the world knows more about that now, and knows more about the enormous impact of microRNAs on biology and disease than they would have if there hadn't been a Nobel Prize in that area. So I think the real impact is on the broader community. And the same is true for peace, and certainly the same is true for literature, because often the literature prize goes to somebody that frankly we haven't heard of before, and suddenly everybody's reading that person. And that, okay, maybe it's a bit unfair that it's just that person that gets highlighted, but on the other hand, it's good that people read. So there's always a flip side, but broadly it's spreading knowledge, and that's what it's about, and spreading the story that it's good to increase knowledge. It's a pretty fundamental human thing to be doing.
Great.
I love your question, though. It's really interesting. Thank you.
Well, I don't know if Marvin and Carol would want to make another question. Carol? Yes? Okay. Let me add you. Go ahead.
Okay. I know that you have many experience talking to people that have won the Nobel Prize. So in your experience, what are some characteristics that they have in common? Or maybe in their experiments or in their work, or even as a person, what are all the characteristics that they maybe do share in common and make them a winner?
Yes, that's the big question, isn't it? I think the first thing is maybe something that is revealed by something I used to ask them when I started, because I met many people who had worked for a very long time on a single question. And I used to ask them, how come you stayed with this question for 10, 20 years? How did you not lose your focus and go and do something else? And they would just look at me as if I was stupid and say, well, if it's an interesting question, why would you lose focus? If you're interested in it, why get distracted? And after a while, I realized it was the wrong question, because they can't help themselves. They really are interested. And so I think so at least from the ones who are making discoveries, I think the common factor is that they cannot help themselves from being interested in what they're doing. It's not artificial. It's not that they go into the lab and think, what shall I do today? Okay, this is a good question. It's that they wake up thinking, I really, really, really want to know the answer to this. And people often talk about luck and the Nobel Prize, and they talk about, it's lucky to get one. And of course it is lucky to get one. But I think that the great luck is that they're the sort of people who have in them this ability to focus. And I don't know where it comes from, and not everybody has it, but those that do and can really commit to discovery, they can do special things. And of course, for most people who get that level of commitment, they don't get to an answer that is so important that they get recognition or a Nobel Prize. But for those who are who are lucky with their pursuit, they find their way. So that's one thing. What else? I think they're generous. I think they tend to be people who are not too secretive about what they do. They're not doing it, they're not keeping it to themselves. They tend to, of course, they're sensible about, not giving away the most important thing they know, perhaps, but they tend to talk to a lot of people and colleagues and share information and understand that the more you share, probably you get back more than you would share. And they keep abreast of what's going on, so they understand the significance of what they're doing within a broader context. But I think it's that, and they work very hard. Another thing that is key is that, they usually have had periods of working really, really hard. And I mean, there are many stories about that, but there was one laureate called Oliver Smithies who was very good at talking about this. He got the prize for producing the transgenic mouse, and but he was a serially inventive person. He invented many things. He invented gel electrophoresis. He almost invented PCR. He was really, really good. And he used to say, I remember him saying to students, he'd say, we come to the problem of the weekend. If you take a weekend, then on Friday afternoon, you just basically have to wind down your experiments. So you're not doing anything Friday afternoon. And then when you come back on Monday morning, you have no idea what you were doing on Friday. So you spend all of Monday morning trying to remember what it was you were doing on Friday. And then by Monday lunchtime, you're working. But basically, you're only therefore working a 4-day week, Monday lunchtime to Friday lunchtime. And he said, in order to stay on top, you really have to be thinking all the time. So you have to work just a little bit on Saturdays and a little bit on Sundays. And then he'd see all these very depressed faces with all, oh God, 7 days a week I have to work. But then he'd lean forward and he'd say, but of course you don't have to work hard at all. You have to play, and you have to play very hard. But it's all play because it's all so interesting. So that's the secret. It's that they want to be doing it so it doesn't feel like work, and they work all the time.
Have you ever considered writing your insights on what you have learned in a book?
Yes, I've considered it, and people sometimes nicely suggest it, and I need to stop in order to make myself do it. I'm not the sort. I mean, there are all sorts of clever people out there who manage to see. They seem to do full-time jobs and then they write a book in the evening. I seem to be too lazy or disorganized for that. So I think probably I need to just stop. And somebody, so again, invite me to Honduras. Say, okay, here, come and sit here for 6 months and write, and then maybe I'll do it. And that, I've got one more thing to say. I'm sorry, your question is so important. I think they're risk takers. They don't play it safe. They play it safe in some ways. If they have lots of students, they might do safe things to make sure their students don't lose don't get nothing. But they have some element of them that is doing something that might well fail. And they're willing to risk that failure in order to get something big. So they live dangerously, if you like. A little bit. Not really dangerously, but you know what I mean. Intellectually.
Yeah. Intellectually. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Marvin, I think there would be time for one more question.
Ok, tengo dos preguntas. ¿Cómo se desconecta del mundo académico y científico, y qué significa para usted el éxito?
How do you, ¿cómo se desconecta, tu pregunta, ¿verdad? Del mundo académico.
¿Cómo se desconecta del mundo académico y científico, y qué significa para usted el éxito?
How do you disconnect from this scientific world, and what does success mean to you? Those are his two questions.
Again, great questions. I mean, on the first one, of course, it's also something I think that that students the world over, young scientists the world over, ask laureates all the time. What about work-life balance? How do you switch off? And in their case, they always emphasize the importance of taking time to not be thinking full on about a project, because they often say because ideas formulate when you're not concentrating so hard on it. So and they talk about, you go hiking, or I don't know, read books or do painting or whatever it is. And that's good time, but it's good time because it regenerates you, but also because the ideas can progress. So it's very focused on the real question. In my own case, I don't have any problem disconnecting. That's why I'm not good at research. I can switch off very quickly and get absorbed by all sorts of other things. And I have a particular interest in sculpture. That's one of the things I like a lot. So I spend a lot of time looking at sculpture and sort of playing with sculpture and trying to, put things together and stuff like that. And I also like, as I mentioned earlier, I like nature a lot. So I spend quite a lot of time out in nature. And I have practical things like a dog that I enjoy spending time with and just communing with. But sorry, the second question I've already forgotten.
How do you define success?
Yeah, myself. I think that it's a brilliant question, but I have a very uninteresting answer to it. Because, as I said earlier, I seem to be sadly focused on what is in front of me. So I get great pleasure from doing things well. And if I'm honest, of course, that can be something fairly big, like we just ran last month. And we had our first visit to Colombia, and I visited 3 universities in Bogota and Medellin. And we did some other things as well, and they went very well. That people were really happy that we came, and I think we had a big effect. And then just before that, I'd been in Tokyo, and we'd run a big meeting on different topics like quantum technology and AI and genomics. And again, I think that the conversations were meaningful. So those are big pieces. And so those at the level of a project that's taken several months to put together and then happens, they work, and those feel like success and make me happy. But if I'm honest, I also get happy from writing I get pleasure and a feeling of success from writing a good email. If I write a good email and I send it and I'm pleased with it, and of course you write emails all the time. I mean, what do emails matter? But they give me, I get a real buzz if I feel it's been a good piece of communication, and a good buzz if the communication goes well with somebody else. So I get a lot of, so success feels like doing things well that are in front of me, I suppose, is the boring answer. And I'm sure I should have a better answer that is more imaginative and a bigger goal than that. Like, I want success would feel like, I don't know, having an influence on the direction that young scientists take, or being able to help people in countries where it's more difficult to do science think about how to do, find a path into science. And that's certainly the goal, but it's too difficult to measure success on that level. You just try. But success feels like this worked right now.
Great. I think your answers are very, very interesting, Dr. Adam.
I think they're revealing of a of a lack of imagination.
I don't think so. I think you're very humble. Maybe well, you meet so many people around the world and talk to
you meet so many wonderful people.
Yeah.
What possible approach to doing so would be? I mean, how could you possibly feel other than humble if you meet all these wonderful people, not just laureates, but as I say, all the young people. I mean, it's amazing. You meet people in such who just do such amazing things. Anyway.
Great. Thank you. Well, to finish, maybe the last question would be, what advice would you have to young researchers, maybe from Latin America, who might also be hearing this talk, to maybe dream of someday making a discovery that someday they can hear you through the phone on the other side?
Well, on that particular thing, on the question of dreaming of getting a Nobel Prize. Now, if you spoke to scientists who'd been awarded the Nobel Prize, they would probably almost all say, you mustn't, it's not about dreaming of getting the Nobel Prize. It's about finding something that really makes you so engaged and passionate about it that you can't give it up, and just allowing yourself to explore those questions and those mysteries. And if you can find that, that's what you should do. And maybe you'll make discoveries, and that will be enough. That's what you should aim to do. You should aim to solve a problem. But then again, some laureates might say, and I've heard them say this, yeah, but if your question isn't the sort of bold question that if you solved it, then maybe somebody would consider you for a Nobel Prize, then what are you doing? Surely you want to be that ambitious, right? So maybe it's not such a bad thing to dream of getting the Nobel Prize, not with the expectation at all that it could happen, but at least to think big in your research. And you don't have to start by thinking big, of course, but you just have to allow yourself to know enough and be open enough to topics that you find something that will excite you enough to then be able to start thinking big about it. And I think it's really hard, because there's the research you give in a dream. There's the advice you'd give in a dream world. In your dream world, you'd play around with all sorts of different possibilities, and you'd be ignited by one topic. Something would hit you, and you'd say, yes, that's it. I found my love, and I'm going to go for that, and I'm going to do that. But of course, the reality is that it's not like that, because you're desperately trying to get your next position. You want to get your doctorate position, then you've got to find a postdoc, and you're trying to decide, especially if you're coming from countries in Latin America, for instance, whether you're going to stay there or whether you want to take opportunities to move abroad. And that's a very hard decision for a lot of people who work in countries where the resources are not as fully funded as they are elsewhere. And so there's a lot of pragmatism and compromise along the way. But nevertheless, I think the advice is, find something that really sustains you, because my answers are so long. I'm so sorry.
No,
but everywhere, every single place I've been in the world, and it hasn't happened today, amazingly. So you are a rather unique group. But somebody asks, how do you deal with failure? How do you deal with it when the experiments aren't working? Nothing's, and that, it seems to be a common experience that everybody goes through, that, things don't work and it becomes very depressing and difficult. And actually, the laureates don't tend to understand that question. It's a bit like the one, how do you focus? It's like, well, things don't always go right. Sure, everything, things can go very wrong, but the question's still there, right? So, you just keep going, right? And I suppose that's, it's finding something that is so absorbing that you don't really care that things aren't working. You don't really care that, the experiment hasn't delivered what it should. You care that, because you just think, okay, fine, find another way around. But I still but the essential thing is I want to get to know the answer. So my advice to young people would be, try and be as broad-minded as possible and let yourself find something that that has that ability to drive you.
Thank you for that inspiring answer. Well, Dr. Adam, thank you very much for the time you have given to us. It has been a true honor to have you with us and to learn from you. And we're very grateful, and we wish you the best in all your endeavors.
You're very kind. It's so kind of you to have invited me to this, and it's lovely to meet all four of you. And Hector, this has been an absolute joy. The questions are marvelous, and they're so thought-provoking. I just wish we'd had time for me to explore all of your answers to those same questions, because I think that one of the things that going around the world teaches me is that it's very much important it's just very enlightening to listen to everybody's perspectives on all of this.